The topic of today's discussion is analysis of fallback layer for the 4G user. There was a specific scenario in question. It was requested that could it be possible that a UE in 4G network for his voice connections shall only come to the 2G network of Idea, and for his data connections should go to the 3G network of Idea. So this talk is today focused on this scenario itself. Now, before we go on to the actual analysis, let's look at some of the principles of CS fallback and cell reselection in a 4G network. A typical 2G network consists of a BTS, BSC, which will have a CS connection with MSC, and then a PS connection with SGSN and GGSN. A 3G network, when it became available, the BTS was called Node B, RNC, a controller for the Node Bs, which again connects to MSC and to the SGSN and GGSN. With introduction of 4G, the eNode B hardware the Node B hardware has been modified to called eNode B. The gateways, the PS nodes were to be upgraded or has been renamed as MME and SNP gateway, obviously with some additional functionalities. One thing which is additionally there, which is that there is a connection between MME and MSC now. This interface is called SGS interface. This interface is must now in 4G, and based on the mapping of tracking area in MME, there needs to be a corresponding location area in the MSC. Now this tracking area has to be one of the location area of either a 3G network or a 2G network. So a decision has to be made here that this tracking area of 4G, if a UE comes in there, where shall it register to? Could it be to 2G or could it be 3G? Now when a UE, when it powers up, it will carry out a location area update based on this mapping here, which is the TA to LA mapping. So not only the UE will register in 4G network, but it will also register in a CS network, either 2G or 3G, and it has to be one, and it is a choice that we have. Our current configuration is that it will latch on to the 3G LAC. Now let's see what happens when a UE tries to make or receive a call. Whenever UE tries to make a call, the MME will initiate some message flow with the MSC on this SGS interface, and based on the configuration within this eNode B, the UE will be redirected to either 3G or to the 2G. Now it makes sense that since UE had first registered into, when it was powering up, it has registered into 4G and one of the 2G, one of the 3G or 2G layer LACs. So the fallback from here, from the 4G, should also be to the same LAC. That will cut down the time which is required, which is required if an additional location area update is required. So this will, if UE has already registered in, let's assume that UE had registered in a 3G network before when it powered up, and when it is making a voice call, and in eNode B we configure the UE, so we configure the cell such that all the users in this cell will always fall back to the 3G cell. So in this case, once the UE is redirected to 3G, it does not need to do a location area update again, because it has already done it at the time when it had powered on. If, however, it does not find this lag, or let's assume for practical purpose, if 3G is not there and 2G is there, then UE will be redirected to 3G, but because UE is not able to find the 3G network, it will go back, it will go to the 2G network. And at this point in time, because it's a different lag in 2G than in 3G, so it will do a location area update, which will ask for more delay. Now, typically what we have seen through the trial networks is that a fallback from 4G to 3G is of the order of 8 to 9 seconds for in a worst case scenario, mobile to mobile call. But the same thing from a 4G to 3G, 4G to a 2G network is of the order of 10-11 seconds, and in some cases we have seen more. So what happens is that even if the lag configuration is to a 2G or a 3G as appropriately set here, the fallback time taken for a 2G network is marginally higher than a 3G network. And we have seen in our testing result that it can vary from 1.2 to 2 seconds in a good coverage area. Now with this 9 seconds versus 11 seconds is what we are looking at. 11 seconds is a very perceivable time for any UE to receive a voice call. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. Another thing which happens is when a UE falls back, typically in a 4G network, UE will always have a default bearer, which means he has always got his PS session on. When the user falls back to 3G network for his voice connection, his data connections also get transferred here. And in 3G, you can have voice and data together, so this makes it much more preferential layer. If, however, let's say user falls back from 4G to 2G, his data connection has to suspend and UE can carry his voice call as the way it happens today. Even if it is the same principle as when a user moves from 3G to 2G, his data connection suspends in 2G. Now let's look at this scenario. What happens when a UE disconnects the voice call for which it has come to either a 3G layer or a 2G layer? So when the release has been done in any 3G or 2G network, the 4G UE will be asked by the respective 3G network or 2G network to go back to the 4G network of idea. And in this case, we have seen it happen quickly. It is roughly of the order of 500 millisecond to 1 second. So within 1 second, it can go back to the user can go back to from 3G to 4G when it is available, or from 2G to 4G if it is available. Now let's look at the idle mode principles. That the previous one was when the UE was already in a 4G network and it was in a call or it receives a call. Now let's look at where does a 4G UE will normally camp on. So this is the usual architecture which was there. Now whenever a UE powers up, okay, before we go into powering up scenario, so there was this layer, 2G layer, 3G layer, now there is a 4G layer. Now from a UE point of view, we need to look at that it needs to now choose where should it latch onto. There are 3 layers now, and in some networks there are more layers, FDD, TDD and others. So a priority needs to be defined. The system has been, the 3GPP has defined that there has to be now priorities. So typically in any network, 4G is a priority, higher priority, then 3G is the second best priority, and then 2G is the next best priority. So there is a layering of the network which happens. So let's say highest network, then there is a higher network, and then there is a lower network, lower priority network. But UE, whenever it powers up, it will latch onto one network, either 4G or 3G or 2G. It can only register onto one network. And when it does that, let's say if it is doing in 4G, as I explained earlier in the previous slide, that it will register not only in 4G but also in a corresponding CS part. And let's say in our configuration, it will be registering onto the 3G network. In a 3G network, when UE powers up, it will also register for a CS network of 3G LAC and a 3G rack. Similarly, when a UE powers up in a 2G network, it registers for the 2G LAC and a 2G rack. So UE is always registering onto one network for both CS and PS services. Now, since on day one 4G coverage will not be equivalent to a 2G coverage and a 3G coverage, so let's assume that a UE which is in a 4G coverage and it is moving into an area where the 4G coverage is not so great. What will happen in that scenario is, in a 4G system there are some thresholds defined. This threshold will ask the user to start looking for a 3G network or a 2G network. Now typically 4G is getting deployed in the areas where 3G is already available, and because of the because the 3G can handle both CS and PS data services, so 3G layer is defined the next higher priority after 4G. So what happens is, a UE, once the 4G coverage fades, UE moves from 4G network to a 3G network, and here also it is able to do its voice call as well as data call as it is able to do today. If somehow, let's assume that 3G is not there, there are scenarios which can arise. In that case, UE will move from a 4G network to a 2G network. So let's assume the case that when UE has moved from a 4G to a 3G layer, and now either it has gone out of the coverage scenario, or it is now the 4G coverage is improving when he is moving in a certain direction. In that case, what will happen is that after every X amount of time, the 3G network will evaluate whenever the UE is not active. Whenever UE is sending him, whenever UE is in a dormant kind of state, the UE will look at the configuration which is defined in the 3G network and then accordingly reselect the 4G network. So typically that is done when UE goes into a self-fetch state, which happens every 5 to 7 seconds, if UE is not transferring data. So there are some other mechanisms also which are available, but this is the most common mechanism through which it will be possible to move the UE from a 3G network to a 4G network. So this is the way UE will move back to 4G network. Okay. Now let's look at the various considerations that we should consider while deciding where the UE should latch onto. The first and foremost is that there can only be one network layer for which UE will register, and that will be for both voice and data. So either 4G or 3G or 2G. For a CS fallback 4G users, it can fall back to a 3G network or a 2G network based on the configuration. And once the call is released, once the CS call is released, UE can be redirected back to the 4G network if the 4G coverage is available. Now let's look at this scenario of the CS fallback in our IDEA 3G provider circles, where we have our own 3G and 4G and 2G obviously. The first thing we mentioned was that the time taken for 2G is approximately, time taken for migration to 2G from 4G is approximately 2 seconds higher. Remember, we said 9 seconds in 3G network and about 11 seconds in 2G network. In a CS fallback type of scenarios, this 2 second matters and is perceivable, especially in comparison to the operators which will have VoLTE network. There the call will mature in a 2 second, altogether 2 seconds. So we have to choose between 2 second versus 9 second or 2 second versus 11 second as a choice. It makes a lot more sense to choose 9 seconds or a 3G network as a preferred choice for CS fallback, because it takes less amount of time. Another important thing we should consider is that now there are UEs which are available and which is coming in market, which can do PS handover from a 4G network to a 3G network and from 3G network to 4G network. there are almost no UEs or very fraction of a UE which can do from 4G to 2G handover or 2G to 4G handover. And we have not come across any such UEs, but in case if it exists. But there are many UEs which could do from a PS handover from a 4G network to a 3G network and vice versa. And handovers obviously has a better delay than the CS fallback or the reselection mechanism. Another thing which we have said many times is that in 3G network both CS and PS services can continue. So that is the network that we should prefer, because user is still getting some data services there. The triggers and there are furthermore triggers which are available for the not only just the voice call release, but there are periodic measurements also which we can do so that user could be sent back to the 4G network quickly. It is a common practice in India and in abroad that 3G is considered as the preferred layer for CS fallback because of these reasons. Also, for idle mode, since we know that 4G has a higher priority and then 3G has a higher priority, next best priority, and then 2G is the next best priority, so the reselections could be done a lot more faster to a 3G layer. And another aspect which is there is 3G can sustain voice and data call at a far lower levels also, because 3G has some better sensitivity than 2G network. So in 3G network we are able to sustain data calls at, let's say, -105 to -108 levels, and voice call up to -110. While in 2G this thing fades away at -102 levels. So it makes a lot more sense to do it for 3G, for CS fallback. Now let's consider scenarios where where idea is a 3G secret circle, or our circles where we have only got 2G and we have got 4G there. So circles like Karnataka, TNC, Northeast. Okay, Odisha does not have a 3G ICR layer, so I will not talk of that. But these three networks, there our recommendation is we should fall back from 4G to 2G network, our own 2G network. And one can argue that why we are recommending here to fall back on a 2G network when it can we recommended for the our 3G circles to fall back on 3G network. The reason for this is, there are two prime reasons for this. One is, in order to do a fallback, there is a lot of things which needs to be done by the 3G provider of that circle. Remember we talked of SGS interface, this interface. So that needs to get configured, and that will take time, or 3G operator may not want to do it for idea. So in that case, it makes sense to do it to 2G. And the second more important thing is that for every terminating call, we will end up giving revenue to the 3G partner. So it's better to for where we don't have our own 3G network, we should fall back onto the 2G network. This point we have already discussed before. Now for idle mode scenario, 2G UE in idle mode will reselect 4G network. Why? Because we said that the 4G network has the highest priority. So any UE which is in a 2G network and a 4G network is available, it will try to latch onto 4G network because that has got the highest priority. If however 4G is not available in that area, then it will select 3G layer as a higher priority, because this is current behavior also, but just that the mechanism of defining priorities have changed. But in 2G we will say that today we define that in our 2G networks that anytime a 3G network is available, please go to that network. It will by this also it will continue to remain the same behavior, that if 4G is non-existent, then user will go on to the 3G network of the ICR partner. Now there is one important aspect to look at, which we have highlighted before also, is that in 2G, in our 3G circles, once the user moves into the 3G network of the partner, he will be stuck there, because 3G network has not defined any configuration for 4G of idea. Now we carried out a lot of testing with Airtel on this in Punjab and Maharashtra, and we demonstrated that by deploying features it can be done. But however, for lack of the commercial arrangement, it did not get implemented. It is now time to get these arrangements in place, so that if any of our idea user is in a 3G ICR zone, so from there he is able to go back to the 4G of idea. This will require some configuration for the 3G partner in their network. So this is one important thing for the three circles of ours. So let's look at the recommendations. Our recommendation is, for 3G provider circle, UE shall fall back to the 3G layer for CS fallback connection, and once CS call is complete, we should transfer the UE back to the 4G network. For the 2G circles or 3G seeker circles, UE shall fall back to 2G layer for CSFB connection, and after clearing the call, we should transfer the UE to the 4G network. And the last point which is there is, for the 3G seeker circles, we should carry out the arrangements with the 3G ICR provider to allow the reselections of idea 4G user from the 3G to the 4G network. This completes our discussion for today. Thank you.